first off, an apologies in advance, because what I'm doing here is feeding the troll, and that is being generous. This is a moron who, if his IQ was a few points lower, we'd need to water him daily. Now, look, I try to steer away from personal and ad hominem comments on this channel, stick to the politics, but as you'll see, I'm really being quite generous here. Now, a bit of context, this relates to the current controversy involving Elon Musk, the increasingly radicalised far-right plutocrat and toddler who owns Twitter, or X, and is the most, of course, powerful figure in the court of Donald Trump, at least for now, until the inevitable falling out, which I'm much looking forward to. Now, Musk has demanded, because all of a sudden he seems to think he runs Britain, a government inquiry into what is often described as the grooming gang scandal. As it happens, there's already been the independent inquiry into child sex abuse in 2022, whose recommendations have still not been implemented. He's variously demanding that the British king overthrows the government. Doesn't work like that, and is, amongst other things, defaming the government minister Jess Phillips. Not someone I normally would bat for, but the attacks on her are a disgrace. She's someone who actually has spoken out about this issue a lot. Her safety is potentially being put at risk by this incitement. Now, the British government has failed to come out and defend her against a foreign plutocrat doing his best to destabilise this country, only 5 months after an attempted national pogrom against British Muslims, which has just been erased, it seems. Now, according to YouGov, Musk is widely hated in this country, and the government could come out swinging against foreign meddling in our democracy, but unfortunately, they are unprincipled cowards. Now, enter the fray a Australian oddball named Drew Pavlou, who has an obsessive grudge, not least because of my opposition to Western complicity in Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people. Now, to give you a gist of who we're dealing with here, and apologies for having to explain this, he once tried raising money to build a life-size statue of me urinating in my mouth. So I think you'll agree I'm being pretty mild about him, all things considered. Now, he's posted a clip from a video I made back in April 2023 about the then Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, one of the most unpleasant politicians in Britain. And boy, do you really have to put in the effort to clear that one. What he's done with this post is whip up a far-right mob. So there is a general wider issue here I want to draw attention to. His caption ascribes to me the quote, "The narrative around grooming gangs is racist and untrue." Not even a quote of mine. You see reputable people who aren't trolls, when they quote people, they actually quote what they actually say. What he's done, in any case, is post a clip that is deliberately out of context for willfully inflammatory ends. Let's just see the clip he's posted. About vulnerable white girls being targeted by British Pakistani grooming gangs. Now, that is the sort of thing you would have expected to read in BNP leaflets, and which not that long ago would actually have been condemned by Tory and Labour politicians alike. But we are in 2023 in the worst possible timeline. It's not true. It's really important to make this very, very clear. It isn't true. So watching this deceitfully clipped version, you would think I'm saying that British men of Pakistani origin had not raped white girls in, for example, Rotherham and Telford. You'd think I was saying it was racist and untrue to say that, but I wasn't saying that. Here's the clip in actual context, in which I was responding to comments made by the then Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, focusing exclusively on grooming gangs as specific to British Pakistani men. Okay, so here's she talking about vulnerable white girls being targeted by British Pakistani grooming gangs. Now, that is the sort of thing you would have expected to read in BNP leaflets, and which not that long ago would actually have been condemned by Tory and Labour politicians alike. But we are in 2023 in the worst possible timeline. It's not true. It's really important to make this very, very clear. It isn't true. According to a Home Office report in 2020, the majority of child sexual abuse gangs are made up of white men under 30. The media focuses on high-profile cases of Rotherham and Telford, which have bred the idea that it's British Asian men predominantly driving this abuse. But they can find no conclusive evidence that black and Asian offenders were overrepresented compared to the national populations. And the Home Office report found that 92% of defendants were from white ethnic backgrounds. Nowhere did I deny that British men of Pakistani origin had raped many white girls in, for example, Rotherham and Telford. These are horrific scandals, which are very much real, and it is not racist or untrue to talk about those scandals. What I was talking about was the question of reducing grooming gangs to one ethnicity. Indeed, I made that video in April 2023. Months later, the press regulator imposed a correction on a Mail on Sunday column in which Suella Braverman had claimed almost all child grooming gangs were British Pakistani. Now, if you know anything about Britain's press regulator, it is largely a toothless, useless body, which does very little. For them to intervene is actually quite something. So what I did in that video, is merely state facts which our national press regulator went on to force a national newspaper to correct after an opinion piece by the then Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, wrongly suggested that the phenomenon of grooming gangs was all but specific and unique to British Pakistani men. That's because, for example, a Home Office report found that, and I quote, the majority of child sexual abuse gangs are made up of white men under the age of 30. Whilst we had hideous scandals, and nobody is denying that, these are hideous real scandals involving British men of Pakistani origin. If you take, for example, Walsall, 21 members of a grooming gang were convicted in 2023. All of them were white, and yet they received very little prominent attention from the media. Why? Well, if we look at the statistics, 88% of defendants tried for child sexual abuse are white, whilst white Britons make up 83% of the population, so an actual overrepresentation. Asian Britons as a whole make up 7% of such defendants, while making up 9% of the population. So, underrepresented British Pakistani defendants specifically make up 2% of such defendants and 2% of the population. So, neither underrepresented nor overrepresented. That's not to say that there aren't specific factors at play in specific criminal scandals. In Rotherham, Telford, Rochdale, the men responsible for hideous child sexual exploitation use their position in the nighttime economy. We're talking taxi drivers, we're talking takeaway shops, which gave them access to often deeply vulnerable children at night. And these sectors in these areas tend to be dominated by British men of Pakistani origin. Now, there are also allegations of potential police corruption. Very convenient, I had to say, to then deflect from that by claiming that the real reason for such failures was all down to a fear of being accused of racism, which is not something the police tend to be scared of. If you look at the figures, for example, of stop and search in Britain and which ethnic groups or people belonging to certain ethnic groups are most likely to be stopped and searched. Now, briefly back to Drew Pavlou, who I have to say I'm slightly embarrassed that I'm having to talk about at all. He knows exactly what he's doing. He says he's sat there clearly thinking people very understandably get very upset and angry about the sexual abuse of children. Few issues cause such a visceral response in people, and quite understandably so. So he thought to himself, if I dishonestly clip some rage bait, and this really is classic rage bait, I can direct a tidal wave of hatred against someone I despise. Given Twitter, or X, whatever, is now rigged in favour of hateful far-right accounts who can behave essentially as they wish, you can now easily put a target on the back of anyone you despise associated with progressive causes. And so straight away, predictably, a load of high-follower far-right accounts shared his completely dishonest clip, calling me variously a rape gang denier, a degenerate lady who does not care about industrial scale level child rape, and, according to Lawrence Fox, someone who sacrifices the innocence of children, and so on. Now, this in turn set off a tidal wave of crude homophobia, multiple accounts calling me a paedophile, and then, unsurprisingly, an avalanche of death threats and threats of violence. Now, look, you know, whatever, to a certain degree. I do have to take it seriously. I've been targeted by the far right in real life multiple times. Specifically, was beaten up by a neo-Nazi on my birthday back in 2019, who was sentenced nearly 3 years in prison. When I say neo-Nazi, I know someone will go, oh, throw neo-Nazi on a confetti to attack anyone who disagrees with you. Well, I mean, disagree with, beat me up on my birthday. Well, I mean, this guy had a load of Nazi memorabilia in his house, including an SS flag and a Nazi death skull, as well as material related to neo-Nazi terrorist organisation Combat 18, one of whose tenets is kill all queers. I think he passes the threshold of neo-Nazi. I actually found after the trial the Twitter accounts of his friends. He deleted his Twitter account where they talked about beating me up in advance. You know, they'd been radicalised through Twitter. And that was before Elon Musk. So sure, I mean, part of me thinks you should just ignore horrible, just awful people like this. Just embarrassingly bad people. The sorts of people who in real life, the vast majority of people just try to avoid making eye contact with. Now, this guy's completely obsessed. He's tweeted about me over and over and over and over and over and over again. And much like a 5-year-old who defecates in front of a crowd of people, he is desperate for my attention. And I'm giving him maybe the biggest dopamine hit he's ever going to get in his entire life. Alas, when a far-right mob is whipped up off the back of willful deceit with all the threats that come with it in the current atmosphere, I've got little option but to set the record straight. But a couple of things. This guy presents himself as a so-called centrist. But you can see here how so many so-called centrists have been radicalised with so much hatred for the left that they are prepared to offer up fodder for far-right extremists, which is clearly what happened here. Unless he's completely stupid, he would have known what the consequences were going to be. It should be noted that the likes of Elon Musk started off as some sort of centrist before being radicalised to the far right. It also underlines how Twitter is becoming an increasingly dangerous place, which is going to get people hurt. Let's just be honest, not least given the general rise of the far right. But I would end by saying that the sexual exploitation of children is deadly serious. It is a horrific crime, and it needs to be taken desperately seriously. Those who only care about child sexual abuse, when they think it can further a specific hateful agenda against particular minorities and who have no interest at all when the perpetrators are white, those people do not care about child sexual abuse whatsoever. And indeed, when it comes to the far right, like the likes of the English Defence League, for example, there are endless examples of child predators. It's up to the rest of us to make sure, or to do our best, to take this horror with the seriousness that it deserves. Please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts, leave your comments, help us as ever, expand. This is what you'll see me doing in the coming weeks and months, in terms of videos, including all the different mediums, Substack as well. Lots of exciting plans, which I will talk to you about. Lots of more investigative journalism as well, which is what I'm keen to do. Leave your thoughts, comments, press like, subscribe, share the video, correct the record, help me correct the record. And I'll speak to you in a bit.